Now, another word that is used in the scriptures that we're going to look at today that is actually fundamental to us as followers of Christ, disciples of Jesus, is the word grace today. We're going to look at the word grace. And so, since I've already mentioned it, we are in church, right? If I say the word amazing, what's the next word that comes to your mind? Grace. See, I knew you wouldn't disappoint. It was just right there. It's amazing grace, right? And there's this old hymn that we love to sing. It's a cherished hymn titled Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, right? And if you've been raised in the church, or you've been in the church very long, you've likely heard that song. You're familiar with that song. You're familiar with the words of that song. You're familiar with maybe even the history of that song. And in preparation for today, I found that we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks just studying this word, grace. There's hundreds of pages long material that we could dive into. I'm not going to do that today, but if you want to study the topic of grace, there is ample material to study. We're only going to scratch the surface here this morning, but and if the Lord leads you to, maybe this was your question, you want to talk about grace a little bit more, you've been studying, you're just waiting to see what I have to say about it, and you want to communicate it in that type of way, or another series comes to mind, let us know. We'll figure out through the education ministry how we can dive into that in a little bit deeper level and make that available to others. But we're going to talk a little bit about grace. Culturally, when I hear the word grace being used in our culture, I see almost a redefining of grace happening in our culture. I have utilized the word grace for one of my children's middle name. It's a name, right? How many of you know a person named Grace? Yeah, it's okay. You show your hands, right? You're not going to get. We're not going to zoom in on you on the camera for live stream or anything, so it's all right. So there's just a simple naming that we utilize the word grace for, a proper name. There's the word grace is used oftentimes to describe. In fact, if you look this up in a dictionary, this is what I found: simple elegance or refinement of movement. Right? We would call that person actually graceful. Something I am not very much qualified in, but graceful. We also, so like a dancer, right? We would consider a dancer to be very graceful. If you have two left feet, they would say you're not graceful. But there's this elegance. When we look at something, there's this refinement of movement. The second definition that is actually listed in most dictionaries is courteous, goodwill, and polite, meaning you're grace-filled, meaning that you're just a nice person. You know, you're polite. You're okay with not having your way all the time. You often display grace, but really what we're trying to say is kind, polite, courteous. We get to the third definition in our English dictionaries. We get to the third definition of a modern dictionary anyway, where we find the definition of grace to be somewhat biblical, where it says the free, unmerited favor of God. And I really wish that was number one. And I really, it should break our hearts that the very first definition, when we come to the word grace in our culture, it takes 3 tries to get to the word grace on a biblical understanding on what the word grace really does mean, or what it should mean, and the unmerited favor of God. And then we do go back to a cultural one, actually, that we really love and probably would love to see that like second on the list. And if we're not of a spiritual nature, then we'd want it to be first. There's this thing called a grace period. Yeah. And we all know what a grace period is, right? It's not the thing at the end of a sentence. It's this time where if you owe some money and you are given time to make payment, especially if it's a late payment. If like your due date is here and then you don't make payment here, well, then there's a grace period of, say, a couple days or a couple weeks. And then you're like, well, why don't you just say the due date is here then? Well, that's because they're giving you a grace period. And we like that idea of a grace period, that kindness shown, I guess, that we're not actually charged or penalized. We're shown some grace. Now, when we look at grace biblically, is it just something, I mean, when we think about especially amazing grace, is that just the elegant movement of some person as opposed to a herky-jerky type of stumbling? Is that amazing? I don't know, it's good to watch. It's fun to watch, I guess, but is that amazing? Maybe for some. Is it amazing that it's just polite courtesy? Is it amazing that someone just knows how to be polite? I suppose when we look at a culture that's fairly rude in a lot of ways, it's amazing when you stumble across somebody who's actually polite. Or what about that grace period? Is that really amazing to you? Does it qualify to put the word amazing in front of those definitions? I think it's a great question to think through. Or is this grace that is unmerited favor shown to us by God in heaven, creator of heaven and earth, all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present, as we just talked about? Is that amazing? And now that, I would say, is. But to understand it even more fully, we have to understand what grace is. What is this unmerited favor? What makes it amazing? And when we think about this concept of grace in the Scriptures, you're going to think, this is Christianity 101, or this is Bible 101, right? I came to church and I heard something I've known for my entire life. I pray that there's something here that you are reminded of, that you're renewed in. But often, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes even the most learned of Christian disciples struggle with the concept of grace, because we begin to wrestle at different times in our lives about, well, I'm not worthy of grace. Is it really grace? I need to keep doing these things in order for me to earn grace or to be worthy of grace. And so even the most scholarly among us still struggle with the word grace, because it's just this simple, completely unmerited favor that God has shown us. And as human beings, I think oftentimes we're uncomfortable with grace because of this fact. And if we want to be truly American about the theology, well, we are more comfortable with law-based theology, because then we have a part in it. We have been able to, in some way, shape, or form, earn the grace that we've been given. That we actually are due grace based upon some action, based upon how well we've done, how our ability to control our own actions, to be able to control our own words, even our own thoughts. And so by doing so, when we actually are obedient, as we talked about, then we have been able to purchase in some way, shape, or form this transactional thing that takes place between us and God that gets us grace. And yet that is the furthest concept theologically what we're trying to talk about when we talk about the concept, the topic of grace. And grace in a biblical way is actually completely opposite of the law. As well as when we think about grace in a Christian theology, it's opposite of many other religions. In fact, I'm not sure of any other religion that operates under the fundamental premise of grace as its foundation. You can study world religions, and every piece of it has some level of, I have done this, I have gained this. I do this, and my God will do this, right? It's transactional. And yet in the Christian religion, in the biblical understanding of who God is, the one true God in heaven, grace is just simply his action. and our responses. One of my Bible dictionaries defined grace in a biblical way of this: of the distinctive features of the religion of the Bible, no other system of religious thought, past or present, contains an emphasis on divine grace comparable to that of the Bible. Now, when we study the Old Testament and the New Testament, where is grace present? Well, we see it most definitely in the New Testament, and we'll get to that. But before, our foundation for the New Testament and all of the theology of the need for Jesus and his coming to show us grace, God's compassion in that act, it started in the Old Testament. And so the word that we translate into grace from the Hebrew is actually hesed. It looks like he said or hesed, something like that, but I'm told it's pronounced hesed, and it represents loyalty, faithfulness, goodness, godly action, mercy, and compassion. And these are actions that God has done towards people when we look at this word in the Old Testament. It's stated of Noah and Moses to have found favor, or hesed, or even the word hen, in the eyes of the Lord. There's another Hebrew word that has been utilized. And we see it represented in the scriptures there in Genesis chapter 6, 8, and Exodus 33 and 34. The Psalms are filled with expressions of praise to God because of his grace, or his hesed, or his hen. And it's said of God that he is compassionate and gracious and slow to, what's the word? Anger. I don't have candy. If you were here for Connect this morning, Oren did a wonderful job leading us through a summary of all that we've been learning, and he was like pelting us with candy bars when we would answer the answers to the questions right. So if you've missed that, I'm sorry. You're just going to have to come to a Connect and find out if that's going to continue or not. And maybe someday, but I'm not making any promises. But when we look at this, God is described as a God of compassion, God who is gracious to us, that he's slow to anger. Those are some of the descriptions. Exodus chapter 34, starting in verse 6. And we're going to be, again, just jumping around the scriptures. Feel free to write these verses down. I encourage that. Study them in their context. But here in verse 6 of chapter 34, it says, "The Lord passed before him and proclaimed that the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation." Now, all of this merciful and gracious God, slow to anger, these are characteristics, wonderful characteristics that we see described of God, even in the Old Testament. Underneath the law, we know that God is a grace-filled God. But it's also important to note that grace does not mean free pass. Oftentimes, when we think grace, we automatically just mean, well, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what happens in life. It doesn't matter my response. I'm just going to do whatever I want, and grace, grace, right? And Paul talks about that. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Grace does not mean free pass, but God's grace is amazing because, well, we see that he does deal with sin. In the Old Testament, under law, that is something to be feared. That is something that each year, each time that there was the sacrifice underneath the sacrificial system, people would travel to the temple and there would be a sacrifice for sin that would be made yearly by the priests. So grace doesn't mean that God just looked the other way and you had no responsibility in this, that there wasn't some response that was needed of the people, but in order for God to offer grace, they first had to understand there was someone to give grace. And they had to understand what grace meant, and in that, it was forgiveness. There was sin, there was guilt that was embodied in the people, and the only way that we could deal with that is really God dealing with it through this action called grace. It was even under the Old Testament. It was not something that, it was unmerited favor towards the people, even under the law. And so we see this type of grace that is just offered to the people for something that they were out of their ability to actually make recompense for, that was being offered. There's this grace, even in the Old Testament. Now, where we get to see this even greater is in the New Testament. Because God's grace carries forward, it is a foreshadowing. The sacrificial system is a foreshadowing of the ultimate grace that would be displayed in the New Testament through Jesus Christ. We see this fully embodied in the New Testament. And this is why we can see God's grace, again, just more fully depicted as amazing. That's why we can sing the words, amazing grace. How sweet the sound. We see this in the New Testament. The word for grace is charis. It is displayed in a lot of different ways. We see it spoken of numerous times in the New Testament. Just one of the reference there we see in Luke chapter 1, verse 30. Again, Mary is being told not to be afraid, for you have found favor with the Lord. That word is charis. Paul spoke often in his opening letters, speaking of grace and peace to his readers, to them, and it signifies favor, but also an element of joy. We'll tie those two together. If you've been given grace, it should naturally lead to the response of joy. I mean, if you know you've been forgiven, if you know there's the unmerited favor that you've been shown, there's nothing you can do, has been dealt with, it should automatically lead to joy. So is joy given? Yes. Is it experienced? Yes. Is it something that you do? Well, in that sense, no. You just receive it. Paul spoke often of this, and we see Jesus, actually the writer of John in verse 1, speaking of Jesus, talking about grace. In chapter 1, verse 14, it says, the Word became flesh, which, again, is all of this depiction of how the God in heaven, our God in heaven, took on the form of man. He left the wonderful nature of heaven, all of the power, all of the authority, all of the joys that is experienced in heaven, things that we can't even begin to wrap our minds around. He decided to exchange that for this life. Human frailty, the sin of human condition was all around him. He identified with us in every way, except in sin. But we see the Word became flesh, and he dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of, what's the word? Grace. You get a candy bar. You get a candy bar. You get a candy bar. See Oren later. Got any left? They're out in the foyer. There you go. Unless they're all gone. But here the God of heaven comes in human form. We see him. He is full of grace and truth. John bears witness about him, and he cries out, this is he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. Even though he was actually the older one. I mean, you start to wrap our minds around that, right? He was before him, but in physical, birth order, he's, I don't know, we'll get into that later, maybe. I don't know. Talk to me about it. It says, for from his fullness, in verse 16, we have all received grace upon grace. And for the law was given through Moses. Even under the law, there was provisions for grace, and we see the precursor of what would be known as the ultimate grace, amazing grace. And he says, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And so here, John, in poetic form, describes that the Word of God, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, can be represented here, came to be and to speak grace and truth. Jesus Christ, the Word, His Word represents grace. His Word, even though it's full of commands, even though it's full of directions for us, it's still full of grace. It's just dripping and oozing with this concept of grace. Verse 16 says, from His fullness we have received grace upon grace. And it explains and it describes in verse 17 how the law, well, it can't do this in full form, but yet we see in black and white there how God made grace available, even under the law system. And yet it proclaims under the New Testament how Jesus Christ would come and offer for us grace upon grace. And we see just the depiction of this. So, again, if you're watching online and it's somewhat new, just a simple elementary fundamental concept to the belief of the Scriptures and how we respond to this and what that grace actually looks like. In Titus chapter 2, starting in verse 11, we see Paul and Titus being written. Paul writes to Titus, and he says, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people." And again, this is that going back to the depiction of how the Word became flesh. God would send in human form His Son to reveal to us grace and truth. And through God appearing in this way, He would bring salvation to all people. He would make known truth and He would offer grace, the salvation. If we continue into verse 14, it would say that He who gave Himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for Himself a people of His own possession who are zealous for good works. This is the picture of grace. And so how does God offer us grace? How does God bring salvation through Jesus in grace? This is picture of God giving Himself for us. And God gave Himself for us upon the cross of Calvary. He bore the sin and the shame that we should have received the punishment for. He took it upon Himself on the cross. He was nailed to the cross. He had a crown of thorns placed on His head. He was mocked. He was crucified. He breathed His last. And through that act, the Scriptures depict how God became the one and final sacrifice for sin. See, under the Old Testament law, there was a sacrificial system where one had to sacrifice something to be redeemed or forgiven or shown grace. And under the new covenant, we see Jesus Christ becoming the one and final sacrifice for our sins. Grace upon grace. He redeems us from our sin. This is the picture of grace, of how God gave Himself and redeemed us. What does all that mean? What does redemption mean? Well, I don't know if you've ever been to a can redemption center, right? In Iowa, they do this thing where you bring in a pop can and they give you a nickel. And on the top of the pop can, it says you can redeem this for 5 cents. And in that idea, what is interesting, it was kind of backwards, and it all breaks down here. But when you buy soda cans or other cans in Iowa, they charge you 5 cents per can. And what you're doing is, when you take it back to the redemption center, is you are redeeming that can for the nickel that you gave them earlier. Now, one thing to be noted of, that we are all God's creation. We are formed in His image. And yet sin separates us from God. Sin has caused this separation, just like you parted with your nickel when you got the can. When you give them the can back, you get that nickel back. And so when God gave His Son for you, He purchased you. He dealt with the sin that separated you from Him in the first place. And He purchased you. He redeemed you. And so God gave His Son, and got back you. This is the grace. To redeem means to repurchase, to buy back, to get back, to win back, to free from distress or harm, to free from captivity by payment of ransom, to extricate from or help to overcome something detrimental. Redemption, being redeemed. I think of this in a modern sense. Let's look at all of the different scenarios in life where we would like to redeem things. There are thousands of people right now trapped in a foreign country, in an airport or outside the airport. They're hoping to be redeemed from their situation. They're hoping to be extricated out of that. They're hoping to be free from the harm and distress in the situation that they are currently facing. I mean, they're hoping to be redeemed. And if you could put yourself in their situation, you would look and see and probably feel a sense of hopelessness right now. And when you think of this setting, we can look at it from the outside and we can say it's a terrible situation. It could have been avoided. I mean, we can go through all of the different scenarios and look at it. It's right in front of us. And if you're in a situation where you are desiring to be redeemed or rescued from your situation, boy, it is right in front of you and it is dire, and you would do anything to be shown grace in that situation and to be alleviated from that situation. But I think what we miss and what we forget, because it's even of a greater sense, and I'm not trying to diminish the situation that is taking place, that I think you all know what I'm talking about. Each and every one of us are just like one of those refugees. Each and every one of us are just like those individuals trapped in an airport or on the outside trying to get to the airport or some other border to try to get. Each and every one of us, in a spiritual sense, are in that same situation regarding sin, regarding our status before God if we have not proclaimed God, if we have not received grace, if we have not given our life to Christ. And yet, because it doesn't seem like this imminent, permanent danger all around us, we just continue to live life like, well, someday maybe. Or, yeah, it's not so bad. But I want us to just be fully aware and remind ourselves that without Christ, without the acceptance of the grace that we have been shown, we all are in a very dire state. We are in need of being redeemed. We are in need of rescue. And I hope I'm hitting close to home here, but there are many of us that we know, outside of this church maybe, who have diminished the reality of the situation that they're in. I mean, and just here's a modern headline, right? And we have plenty of opportunities to talk about how awful that situation is. And it's so easy a way to say, it's just like the situation I was in before I accepted Christ. And if you've not accepted Christ, it's the same situation. That situation is dire. Your situation is dire apart from Christ. It's no different. And yet, we have good news. We have great news, because our rescue doesn't come from a Black Hawk helicopter. Our rescue doesn't come from a military might. It doesn't come from a governmental decision. It doesn't come, thankfully, from a group of governmental decisions. It comes from the God of heaven, who has already redeemed us, already has offered us grace. But it needs to be acknowledged and received. I skipped this verse. That situation Romans chapter 3, verse 23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We have all been in that situation where we were in need of rescue. And some of us have acknowledged that, and some of us have leaned upon our God in heaven and acknowledged the grace that He's offered us and responded. And some of us, or those that we know, have not. And Romans chapter 5, if we continue, it depicts this situation, this rescue that has happened, this grace that was shown. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. You and I were like that. Paul describes to the Ephesians that they were once like that. He says in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1, it says, and you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. That was the ultimate status that we were in, that you and I are in, that our culture who have not accepted God's grace are in. But, verse 4 says, God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which He loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By what? By grace, you have been saved. By grace, you have been saved. Now, when Paul says, you were dead in your trespasses, but because of God's grace, you have been saved. We have been rescued. We have been shown a favor that we did not deserve, that we did not earn, that we cannot repay. This is what grace is. And in speaking of grace, it clearly depicts God's activity and capacity to forgive without obligation for repayment, because He's already done this. He's already initiated this action of grace. And so what is our response? Because of this knowledge of grace, because of this act of grace. Well, for many, it's hard to accept, and we spend our whole lives checking the boxes. I mentioned this already, where we do things and practices out of obligation to prove that we're worthy of being redeemed, and somehow wishing to earn a little bit of our redemption. And we fall into this sect and those addressed in the Scriptures where some were teaching that you had to become a Jew first and apply all of the principles of the law first before you could experience God's grace through Christ, before becoming a Christian. And that's not what Jesus came to teach. That wasn't the point of the Old Testament law. And we do things today, right? Some of us got up and we came to church just because, well, we should, right? Not because we're actually responding to God and thankfulness, or out of this heart of joy of coming together and experience fellowship with other people who are doing the same thing. We did it because it's just what we have to do, right? Or we should do. And sometimes we look around and we're trying to tell people, well, you need to come to church. You should be in church. You just come to church, right? But heaven forbid they come to church not dressed right, or showered, or have the language right, heaven forbid, right? Because everybody's got to clean up their act first. You've got to get straight first before you come to church. When we expect people to walk through these doors perfect, in a certain way before they can come here, that's not grace. Because God offered grace in the mess, not after people get cleaned up, not after we got our act together. And for some, grace is too good to be true. And so it's just a story. Some, it's irrational. That's foolishness. The scriptures speak of that. It's deemed as irrational, foolish thought. The cross is foolishness, and so I can't have anything to do with that. And the scriptures actually speak about how some are perishing because they consider it foolishness, this message of grace. And it's just something that, well, human beings, we struggle with. Now, some, we look at grace and we treat it with, well, kind of a cheap grace, or it doesn't really require anything. We miss the cost. We miss the commitment required. Because, well, it's just grace. That'll be okay. I'm forgiven. I've been given grace. And you have, but Paul speaks of this type of attitude in Romans chapter 6. Shall we go on continuing to sin that grace may abound? And his response is, by no means. How can we who died to sin still live in it? And what's interesting to note is that grace has been offered, but the response is, in order to receive this grace, in order to accept this grace, there's things that the scriptures proclaim to us that teach us how we respond to this. In this verse of Romans chapter 6, the next verses there depict the image of baptism and how we are united with Christ. We were sealed with Christ. We put to death our old life, and we are joined with Christ in this way. So there's this picture of baptism. It's not an act. It's not a work. It's not something we're doing to receive grace, but it is a response to grace. The same thing happens with belief. We know people who just say, it's too good to be true. I don't want anything to do with it. And some people have made belief an act and work of something we do to respond to grace. And it's not a work, it is a response, though. Because without belief in grace, what are you believing in? Without belief in God sending his son, grace is offered, it's acknowledged, and it's accepted. It's just, I've mentioned this before, this gift that is offered. But if somebody gives you a gift and you don't acknowledge it, and if you don't say, I'll take that, thanks. And if you don't untie the bow and undo the wrappings and open it up to see what it is, and actually put it to use, have you actually received the gift? Is it doing you any good? No. And so, sometimes we get caught up in all of this, the salvation aspect of it, and that's a whole nother lesson. We're completely out of time on this, but grace. Grace has been offered. He's been offered through Jesus Christ, God's Son. He took on our form and our sin and our shame. And we didn't do anything to deserve it, and we won't do anything to earn it. But the words in the scriptures, the grace and the truth that we see presented in the scriptures, it does demand a response. It does compel us to respond to this message of grace. And while we struggle with what grace is and how to really accept it in our lives, grace has been shown and offered to every individual who lives and breathes and walks the planet. And so our challenge is to, when you're in this moment of struggling with what grace is, to remember that it is unmerited favor. And there is a response to it. And there is this message that as disciples of Jesus we've been called to communicate. A message of grace. The gospel of grace. To tell the world about grace, this unmerited favor that has been shown them. And when they come up with excuses or when they want to rebuttal and say, no, it's too good to be true, I know, right? Just identify with them. Wrestle with them. To offer and extend grace to others. To teach and let them respond biblically to the message of grace. And so I just want to encourage you, hopefully you've had a reminder, a refresher of what grace is. I pray that you will take this and you'll just dive in deeper, that this week you'll get out your concordance. Yes, that's a thing still. You can open up that concordance, a book that actually has pages, and when you look up a word, it lists out all the different scriptures where that word is found, and you'll be able to read, and you'll be able just to study and understand this is what grace looks like. I've been offered grace. This is what grace is. I understand it more fully. And you'll be able to dive in more fully on this concept of grace, but speak of it. Show it. And may the world know it and respond. I'm going to invite you to stand if you're able, and if there is a response that you would like to make to this message of grace, whether it be a time of confession or an open time of repentance, or maybe just a declaration of belief, or even respond in the waters of baptism, take that step. If there is another need or time of prayer that you want to lift up to our God who's offered us grace, we encourage you to come and share in that with another brother or sister in Christ. But let's pray. Father, thank you that you've given this message of grace to us. God, that you have shown us grace. Lord, forgive us when we have treated grace with cheapness, where we have abused grace, where we are just like the people that Paul was speaking to in his letter in Rome, that we have just asked for your grace to abound more and more, and we've treated it with contempt. Forgive us. Lord, restore us, redeem us, give us just that reminder of what redemption is. And Lord, lead us as instruments of your grace in the world, in the communities, in the circles that you've placed us in to communicate this message. Lord, help us to draw from the headlines. All around us, there are opportunities to speak of what grace is, what it looks like. And so just give us wisdom. Give us the words to speak this week. Because your grace is amazing. It's so amazing. And for us who have experienced that grace, who've come to understand that grace, God, we give you praise.